ruined the whole computer on election night by spilling my coffee on it, so I'm keeping it far apart from this replacement. Thank you. I describe myself as an accidental activist because with that background I spent most of my life in corporate boardrooms trying to convince CEOs to do intelligent things and not to do stupid things. But I got interested in LNG because one day I saw this.
I just came back from Rudong in Jiangsu province near Shanghai. I saw the most incredible feat of engineering you'll find just about anywhere. The longest LNG pipeline in the world over land. It goes out about almost 20 kilometers out from the shore so that they can receive LNG from around the world. And that is where we are going to connect Squamish, British Columbia, to China as Woodfibre builds their facility in BC to export natural gas over here, a country that needs it very, very badly. And because they're doing that, they've announced that they're opening their head office in Vancouver very soon. It's an exciting day for British Columbia, another milestone in the hunt to make sure we are first in getting to the natural gas market.
So I saw that and thought, all right, we better find out some more about this LNG business. And it was followed pretty soon thereafter with this. We have a plan to grow our economy
here in British Columbia, and much of that plan is around creating a brand new industry in liquefied natural gas. That is what's going to allow us to secure tomorrow for the people of the province. And LNG, as I often say, is a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation opportunity. The ability to create 100,000 new jobs, the ability to get paying down and eventually paying off our provincial debt altogether. And we will only bring this industry home to our province if we are all determinedly, purposefully working together. And so we brought together a group representing organized labor, First Nations, industry, and government to sit down and think about exactly what we need to do together to make sure that the workforce is there to supply the jobs, because you cannot build an economy without people. And we want to make sure, all of us, that British Columbians are first in line for all of those jobs.
So when I heard that, I thought, what's not to like? 100,000 overall jobs, 75,000 of them long term. British Columbians will be first in line for those jobs. Never mind that BC shortly after signed an agreement with China to allow temporary foreign workers to staff these. A debt-free BC, those of you who have children know that you're going to saddle them with a provincial debt of almost 70 billion, and by the time Ms. Clark is finished, it may be north of 100, and that is not counting BC Hydro's run-of-river projects, which technically, I can speak as a former accounting partner, technically should be on the books, but is being put in a separate part of the books. But and then the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet, cleaner air, at least in China, not counting these fugitive emissions. So, don't know how much of you, any of you know about LNG. It's liquefied natural gas. To liquefy natural gas, you get natural gas, which is methane, is the simplest olefin there is. 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens, lighter than air, as a gas, and it comes from, in BC, mostly northeast BC, from where northeast gold came from, and it's generally more and more these days fracked, which is another process. Conventional gas we've used to date comes from drilling for oil, and you drill vertically downwards, you hit an oil seam, and sometimes you hit air gas pockets, and the gas comes out. And before it became relatively valuable, they used to flare it off. So if you fly from here to Edmonton and you pass over northeast BC, you can see at night all the flares of flaring off all the gases, because the oil companies thought this is rubbish, so we'll just burn it. It comes from northeast BC from several formations. And according to the National Energy Programme that has issued now about 12 licenses for people to export from BC, we have a lot of it. But a lot of it, if the blue bits here are what's called proven resources from several different fields, the Montney Formation, the Liard Formation, the Horn River Formation up in northeast BC, are shale beds, shale gas, where I'll show you in a minute what the technology is, but you realize here that this is a report, and every single company that has applied to the National Energy Board has produced the same report from Ziff Energy in Houston, and Ziff Energy allows me to reproduce their stuff. That the blue bits are the bits that are proven. The red bits are undiscovered resources, and there's a third category called produced. But you realize that that gas that has been proved, that you and I heat our houses with and cook our food with, is a very small proportion of what is estimated to be there, but it's not proven to be there. So we are more and more using fracking technology to get at this stuff, and proven or undiscovered resources, it's also undiscovered as to whether they can be viably extracted or fracked and brought down here or not. So it's a bit of a gamble as to whether it's there. It's not a huge gamble. It's likely there are big shale formations we know there. Whether they will be economically extractable at the prices that we're going to get for natural gas abroad is another matter. But this is quite commonly used to say we have a 100-year supply of natural gas, and when they say that, we have probably 8 or 9 years of proven supply and maybe 100 years of unproven to go with it. This is a typical fracking platform, great big hole in the middle, temporary spaces here. They usually have a dugout that goes with it, which if the slide was brighter you could see it. It's at the back where you use about 10 million litres of water for every frack hole, and it's drilling straight down and then horizontally, going out horizontally beyond that. So you drill straight down, and then you do what's called directional drilling. In other words, you turn the drill and you go horizontal along the seam, whereas the old convention, you went down, you hit a seam, and you kept going straight down. Well, that didn't allow you to follow the gas-rich seam. This directional drilling does. So then you set off explosions in the pipe and blow holes in the pipe, and then you pump down using trucks and fracking fluid, which is a special fluid to enable the gas to come out easier. You pump it down at great pressure and force the gas to come out the hole, and you tap into it. And then you have to clean it of all the stuff that comes up with it, which are not pure methane. It's in the Montney Formation, it's 12% of it is carbon dioxide. And in other formations, they have liquids or near liquids to go with it. So you have to get rid of all those, and you're just left with methane, which is what is natural gas. They boil off or flare off the rest quite a bit, and sometimes they just let it go in the atmosphere. It isn't good. The amount of water you need for fracking is huge. 10 million litres per frack hole, and it's a genuine concern that you will pollute the water, because when it goes down here and is used under great pressure, it picks up a lot of it liquefies a lot of the salts that are in the rock formations. When you break up the rock formations and you pour water at high pressure, it dissolves a lot of nasties. Arsenic is a very common one, and the fracking fluid itself has a whole bunch of stuff that wouldn't do you any good to drink, because several of the components are known carcinogens. So people have been worried about getting this stuff in their water supply, and there are famous stories about people turning their taps on and lighting it. That's typically where the shale formations are close to the surface, and you mess with the water table doing that. Whereas up in the northeast of BC, they're down a kilometre or two, and there is reasonably little risk that you'll mess up the water table. What happens though is when the gas is coming out, some of the fracking water comes back out with it, and then they have to store that on the surface. They're supposed to pump it back into the earth, but the regulatory authority from the Gas Commission are so poor at regulating what they put it in these big plastic lined dugouts, and they develop holes in them, and then the old stuff disappears into the water table because it doesn't get put down the hole like it's supposed to be. Problem with fracked wells, they decline rapidly in productivity. After about 36 months, you've depleted about 80% of the value of the gas, or the amount of gas coming out. So what you have to do, because of that, is a typical oil platform lasts a lot longer. You know, the donkeys that do this, they do it for years and years and years because they're continually getting more oil. But gas, the fracking is only good for about 3 years. And then you have to move over. Typically, you have gone out horizontally about 2 kilometers or maybe 3. So you move over 2 or 3 kilometers and you do it the same again. And eventually you wind up with something that looks like that. Now this is in Wyoming where there's not lots of trees, and I'll show you one from BC where the trees hide a bit of that. But if you wonder why they're shooting wolves to protect caribou in northeast BC, it's because when you do this to a landscape, the caribou don't much care for this, and their forage is very disrupted, and the noise from these things is huge, and the disruption to their traditional ranges is huge. So that their populations are threatened, and yes, the wolves kill off a lot more of them than they used to, but now we have this program where we'll correct all that by shooting the wolves. So there's a reason for everything, and this sort of thing is endemic, where to fix one problem we've created, we'll shoot wolves or do something else. This is northeast BC. That's what it looks like. That's where this gas comes from. More and more of it. Right now, in 2015, about half the blue stuff is conventional gas. The green is coal bed methane. And it's about a 50-50 mix. What comes out of, you've got gas supply here, what comes out of your tap, your gas tap into your furnace or your stove is about 1 out of every 2 molecules is fracked and the other one is conventional. But the amount of conventional gas is depleting very rapidly. We will mostly wind up with fracked gas and with the effects that I've noted. So that's where it all comes from. Because we plan to export, the original plan that Christy Clark talked about was we were going to export 82 million tons per annum, MTPA. We're going to need 50,000 new fracked wells. Well, in our entire 50 years history of providing gas for consumption in BC, we've only ever done about 20,000 wells. So we're about to increase this fracking business hugely. And the Williston water supply is going to be taxed to provide the water for fracking. It's going to be huge influx on our whole ecosystem to be doing this at this kind of scale. 82 million tons of natural gas a year is an awful lot. This is by a guy named David Hughes, who was chief geoscientist for Canada. Typical onshore LNG plant, there are offshore or floating plants that I'll show you a picture of. This is typical. This is one from Darwin in Australia. This is the LNG tanker with 5 big thermos flasks, essentially, to keep it cold, because LNG is gas cooled to minus 162 Celsius. That's twice as cold as any place on this planet has ever been. About minus 80 is the coldest you ever get in the hot wilds of Siberia. This is the tanker. It carries about 60,000 tons of this stuff. Long platform to keep it away from a very large storage tank where it's an insulated tank as well, where the product of this giant refrigerator, you can think of it as a giant fridge that gets it really, really cold. And that's the liquefaction plant. It's a big pile of special piping because the piping has to be able to withstand being at minus 160. Most steel gets very brittle. You have to have a high nickel content in your steel or else you'll crack all the pipes because they start off at room temperature and by the time the plant's operating they're at minus 160. This also, the piping out there has to be at minus 160, and one of the more dangerous operations is when a tanker comes in, is trying to get this pipe down to minus 160 because it's at room temperature until you start pouring LNG down it. and its first reaction when it hits a pipe that's 180 degrees warmer than it is to evaporate, and that's very dangerous because this stuff burns big time. So that's one of the trickier parts of loading a tanker. This is an example of a floating LNG plant. This is maybe the one that Steelhead is proposing for the Malahat Peninsula near Victoria. You take 2 old tankers, you strip out 2 of these big thermos bottles where you store them. Well, if there are 5 of them there, you strip out 4, and you put the refrigerator part on the back. You have a helicopter pad here, you have crew quarters there, and you have a kind of an inlet gas pipe turret at the back. And you got yourself something that'll make 1.5 to 2 million tons of LNG a year. Typically, these are smaller scale than the mega plants which are proposed for here, which are 10 times bigger than that. The storage for about 50,000 and 60,000 tons is the regular size.
So the whole ship is swiveling on that pipe turret?
Yeah, you have to fix it to your thing. So
Okay.
these are kept in position by geopositioning engines, just thrust engines that keep it locked. In the case of Malahat, they're going to have this thing anchored close to shore, and I believe the Douglas Channel LNG is proposing something like this for its small scale. It's the one I think the Heisler are involved with, something like this. This is pretty novel. There isn't one of these. This is a conceptual, but there is a company who's busily building these for small scale LNG plants. They have the advantage of they live in the marine environment, typically offshore. They're not really subject to anybody's laws because they're often international waters or in waters that are controlled by federal governments rather than local municipalities. They don't pay any taxes because, hey, they're not in anybody's jurisdiction. And they use seawater for cooling, and I'll get to the pros and cons of that. To get gas from 20 degrees Celsius to minus 162, you have to suck an awful lot of energy or heat out of it, and you got to put that somewhere, and putting it in the ocean carries its own particular signature. This is the biggest one ever built. It's called Prelude. It's the biggest ship ever, and it's 500 meters. So if you can take your football field and imagine 5 of them strung in a row, this one is an enormous engineering project. See, an LNG tanker that's 300 meters long is dwarfed by this thing. And this is going into operation off the shore of Borneo or Sarawak. Australia, sorry. And uses 50,000 tons of seawater per hour for cooling. 50,000 tons. Imagine 20 to 25 Olympic-sized swimming pools every hour. That's a lot. It's a bit busy, but there are 10 approved LNG export projects. Some of them near you. The Aurora is somewhere, you probably know more up to date as to where they're going to put that, but the idea was somewhere north of Prince Rupert. Douglas Channel Energy Project, which then you have the Kitimat LNG, Chevron, Apache Corp pulled out of that thing, and I think Woodside came in and replaced them, Woodside being an Australian LNG firm. LNG Canada, Shell, also for Kitimat, and of course you have the Pacific Northwest LNG, of which Petronas is the biggest single shareholder at 62%, and KoGas, Korean Gas, and a couple of several other partners. Prince Rupert LNG, which is owned by British Gas, which has sold its assets to Shell, I believe, and they're busily trying to do a merger, which is being opposed by the Australian government. Triton, WCC, which is proposing to put its plant in Tuck Inlet, just north of Prince Rupert, just on the north end of the harbour. More about that in a minute. And then this Woodside proposal, which I think now is moribund because of its interest in the other one that they joined LNG Canada with. Kitimat LNG. So a lot of them. You'll notice that the total NEB approved million tons per annum is about 237 million tons. There's something very significant about that number because you'll recall we don't have an export LNG industry in all of Canada. Any one of these plants would be the first in all of Canada as an export LNG plant. The 237 is about, it's about 243 last I looked, million tons per annum is the world's entire current consumption of LNG per annum. So it would be taking an industry and going from a standing start of nowhere to being the unique total supplier to the entire world of LNG if all of these went. That's a pretty amazing idea, is that you're going to be the sole LNG supplier to the world, or else the world's demand is going to increase so rapidly that there's room to double it in the space of however long our Premier wants to get this, and she originally said we'd have 5 of them operating by 2020. So it's a pretty ambitious project. My years in consulting would say it is beyond ambitious, it's probably unrealistic. And that's the kindest word I'll say about it. But you can't fault them for imagination, but maybe business wisdom you could. A map of where they all are, some of them are down here. There's one in Howe Sound that I'm fairly familiar with. There's the Malahat one proposed for, where you go up the Malahat Highway from Victoria and down towards Ladysmith and Nanaimo. There, in that inlet where it's opposite the Saanich Peninsula, they're going to put an LNG facility right next to the greenest riding in all of the country, Elizabeth Mays. She's not wildly pleased. There's another one proposed, same company, Steelhead, for Alberta Inlet out there, which is a cooperation with First Nations. And there was one proposed, number 5 there, for an old pulp mill at Elk Falls, just north of Campbell River. But the US parent went bankrupt recently, and there's a big court dispute over the assets of the Canadian firm. And then there's one proposed for the mouth of the Fraser River, right on the biggest salmon run in all of BC, which is called Tilbury, and it's being proposed by Fortis, which is the gas supplier to most of the Lower Mainland. And the others up here I'll deal with in a minute. It's a plethora of them up here, and they seem to change their name and where they're located quite regularly. And the pipelines, there are no pipelines up here to speak of at the moment. There's nothing that could serve the needs of an LNG plant. You have a domestic supply 8-inch pipeline, which no LNG plant with its appetite could ever reasonably hope to rely on. We're talking 24, 48-inch for each of them diameter pipe. The big ones, a 20 megatonner or a 30 megatonner, is going to need somewhere between 24-inch and 48-inch high-pressure pipeline all the way from the gas fields. An 8-inch pipeline would be like sipping through a straw for an LNG firm. So these are big. This one is in Howe Sound, an LNG plant here, and this is the exit to West Vancouver and Bowen, both highly populated areas. When the local residents heard about this one, the councils of Bowen, West Vancouver, Lions Bay, Squamish, Gibsons, and Islands Trust all unanimously passed resolutions saying, go away. They haven't so far. This is the owner of the one at Woodfibre. He's an Indonesian billionaire named Sukanto Tanodo, who recently got convicted for tax evasion and paid a fine of $200 million to the Indonesian government. Unwise of our Premier to get photographed with him. This is the Tilbury plant. This is the existing one down there in Tilbury, right on the mouth. If you know where the tunnel is that goes to White Rock, it's just to the east side of that. The tunnel would basically be there. And you see, this is a big storage tank. Now, modern design has them sinking these in the ground, but this company decided not to do that. Instead, they put a containment wall around, so if the tank ever broke, they've got a containment wall that would contain the spillage. They're building a new one which doesn't have that, which I've had a few words to say about. And then we have the Malahat one steelhead, which is a very odd one. This one, the main line from northeast BC to the Lower Mainland comes down through Abbotsford, Sumas, and this one is proposing to build a new pipeline down to a place called Cherry Point, Washington, from Sumas, Abbotsford, Sumas, down here, Linden, Cherry Point, put an underwater 48-inch pipeline all the way into the Malahat Inlet here, and build a floating LNG plant of 6 million tons per annum, which is rather big, in the middle of the Saanich Inlet. Given how it's Canadian gas going into the US and being shipped across the strait right past the busiest ferry terminal in all of BC, into here, just north of the Parliament buildings, I scratched my head and wondered whether they were merely trying to collect frequent mileage piping points or something for a, given how the ships are going to have to come back and traverse the route of the pipeline for halfway around. And yeah, it's an odd proposition. Safety. Mr. Coleman, who's the Minister for Natural Gas Development, is very fond of saying that LNG does not explode, and indeed it doesn't. Not unless you confine it, much like gasoline, as Mr. Molotov will tell you. You confine it in a space where you get the right mix of air and LNG, and yes, it will most definitely go boom. But typically, if you spill LNG over in water or something like that, something different happens. It burns, it does not explode. The difference is, if you're in the middle of it, is rather academic, you're dead anyway. And yeah, this is taken from, I have a cabin on Boyer Island, so one day I took a picture of the ferry going by, and then I photoshopped on, to scale, an LNG tanker, picked at random out of the fleet of about 400 LNG tankers in the world. It happens to be 948 feet. I'll use feet here because most people are of a generation that didn't grow up with metric. I did. Anyhow, so it's twice as long, twice as tall, and that matters in a windy place, and twice as wide as a BC ferry. And that's a big BC ferry, which I've often looked at, Bob, from the deck of my kayak, and the ferry looks rather big. I can't wait to see what an LNG tanker looks like from sitting in the water in my kayak. Big. There are about 400 of them in the world. They mostly come in this 60,000 ton, 300 meter, 900 and plus feet, 1,000 foot long variety. There are very few small scale LNG tankers. It's just that kind of business. They have very high windage because if they're in a windy area, they have to be in narrow places. They have to be maneuvered by tugs, and hopefully the wind isn't too strong because they're over 100 feet tall. Those big. Let me go back. And the other nasty thing I realized from the deck of a kayak is they can't see anything for most of a mile in front of them because the captain is back here and he has to look over these four things, and the only can see in the line of sight is here, so he has to depend on radar, and my kayak hasn't got a very big. Of course, this is taken in Howe Sound, which is a major boating recreation area, and this is actually right where the ferry lane would cross between a tanker exit and a ferry, regular ferry service. There'd be an intersect there, and of course the great fear would be the two would collide, which would not be nice. Inside one of these tanks, there's a person. This is a big giant stir stick because LNG has a nasty habit of accumulating in different densities and causing big burps, and big burps are not handy, are not too nice. So they have to have a kind of a big permanent stir stick in there to stir it around and keep it mixed because it ages. And then when you're talking about a 10 to 14 day voyage to Asia, that aging, the sloshing of the tanker as it moves through the ocean isn't enough to mix it properly, so you have a big stir stick in the middle. The tankers are never empty. They're always, you don't ever want the tank in a tanker to warm up once you get it cooled down, because again, splashing LNG onto a warm tank causes LNG to evaporate in a great big burp, and that's very dangerous because it tends to break things. These tanks are made of, and the newer membrane tankers, they're made of plywood, polyurethane, and there's one other material, but not steel. They're flexible, but they suffer from sloshing. You don't ever want to be going across a windy, wavy ocean with half-full LNG tank. The sloshing of an LNG would break the tank. So you want it full or empty, or mostly empty. Sloshing is a really big deal for LNG tankers. This one is coming into Boston Harbor. And they built this plant way back in the early 70s before they instituted a set of rules that says, don't ever put LNG plants near population centers.
This is not Photoshop.
The mayor of Boston after 9/11 said, get those out of here. And for 2 years was successful in preventing them from ever bringing one in. But anyhow, they did start again, but lately New England has now become self-sufficient due to the shale developments in the US, and they don't bring them much into Boston Harbor anymore. This is a 4-story apartment, and this thing goes right by it into the center of Boston. They're not too thrilled with this because they have to shut down all the bridges. There's a couple of bridges that goes under, and they have to shut down the bridges. They shut down all the sailing clubs and boating clubs because they don't want any boat who just might happen to have terrorists aboard and packed with explosives whacking this thing in the middle of Boston. It was regarded as the #1 terrorist target before 9/11, when this was regarded as ooh. And there's even a report that tells you about 5 feet below the deck level, best place to aim. So they have very special precautions. This dude is just one of 5 different Coast Guard boats that accompanies them in. I'm telling you this because the proposal here is to roll these right past the city of Prince Rupert, closer than it even comes to Boston, and without any particular honor guard. So these dudes inspect the crew, make sure that, because these are coming into Boston, it's an import terminal, inspect the crew, manifest aboard the ship, way out when it's 20 miles out. Each visit costs the city of Boston, because the feds don't pick up the security tab, $60,000 to $80,000 US. So another reason the mayor wasn't thrilled. Why is everybody excited? Because gases are class 2 dangerous goods according to the International Maritime Dangerous Goods classification, right just below explosives. And although natural gas, you'd have to work at it to explode it, you don't have to work at it to set it on fire. And they're fairly dangerous. The other little catch here is that, you know, we have a lot of people talk about the oil, and you have potential Enbridge Gateway oil coming through here. We talk about the International Oil Spill Response Fund, which is a fund which, if you total it all up, the various things, is about $1.3 billion now. When you realize that Lac-Mégantic, with several train cars, cost about that much to clean up, the idea of being able to clean up an oil spill from a tanker here or a pipeline with $1.3 billion is probably, it isn't enough, but it's what we have. The catch, though, is for volatile cargoes such as LNG, none of that applies. And if there's a damage or a big bam, boom, or something spills or something collides, the city of Prince Rupert or Kitimat, or both, are going to be on the hook because the oil spill fund does not cover. Something your mayors might want to know. Even the oil spill fund requires the signatures of 12 signature countries, and they've only got 5 so far, so they expect that in the next 5 or 6 years, the other 7 might join, but the fund is now not operable until they sign. Back in after 9/11, in 2004, the US Senate committee, a special one, chaired by Vice President Biden, said, okay, what would happen if somebody took a shot at or there was a collision of an LNG tanker with something? Would it just float off into the air, as BC government site says it does, because methane is lighter than air? And the answer that came back from Sandia National Laboratories in the US said, not quite so simple. Here's what happens. If you were to put a hole, worst case, in the side of an LNG tanker, such that it spilled out onto water, the effects would be rather dramatic. The spill on water, it would basically freeze the surface of the water. It's minus 160 spilling out onto nice warm water, but it would freeze the surface and skate as far and as fast to get as thin as possible, as fast as possible. But it would also evaporate, and it would, in evaporating, suck up all the water vapor around it and form a low white cloud of flammable vapor. And the minute it got to somewhere between 5% and 15% gas to air mix, and there was any spark from a boat, cigarette, somebody's stove, somebody's malfunctioning electrical switch, nasty. Boom. Something like that. There would be a firestorm of that vapor cloud. And the question then became, how far would that go? And the answer was fairly simple. Let's see. Oops. No, sorry, I don't have that as the next slide. And the answer, Sandia, was, well, we have 3 zones. We have one that's 500 meters either side of the tanker, which in my Irish style I've described as the human popsicle zone, which says at minus 160, if you happen to be in the way of an LNG spill within 500 meters, depending on which side it's spilled on or which way the wind's blowing, you're basically flash frozen. If you're within 500 meters and 1,600 meters either side of this tanker with a hole in it, you are what I describe as the human kebab zone, which is the first spark, and you are toast, literally. And then out to 3,500 meters, that's 3.5 kilometers on either side of the tanker with the hole in it. You are, again, worst case, deeply sunburned, and you stand a 50% chance of surviving.
And that's ignoring onshore, offshore winds.
Yeah, the winds have 2 effects. One, wind will dilute it faster, but it'll also carry it further. So it's a bit of a modeling, what's called dispersion modeling. Now, there are dispersion models that predict much larger, up to 7 kilometers, but Sandia is kind of the recognized Bible. It's the national laboratory. It does this kind of research, and this Michael Hightower is their lead researcher. Their lead dispersion analyst is a First Nations lady from Washington State. And I've spoken to her lots about her dispersion models. Like I said, smoking on an LNG tanker is, you can imagine, highly discouraged. In fact, if you're caught, you're probably thrown overboard. Those who know Lasqueti Island got a kick out of this. This is Tuck Inlet location. This is the WCC, where they're proposing, this is out of their proposal, to turn these. This is only about 1 kilometer across. Those who know Tuck would know better exactly. You're trying to turn a 300-meter tanker, and if there's any strong winds, you have to get tug assistance to do this. These things are not designed to turn on a dime. I asked once how long it would take to stop an LNG tanker, and I had one proponent who told me it could stop in its own length. And then I asked an LNG captain, and he said 3.5 kilometers. So I took it that I shouldn't believe proponents of whole pop.
There's also a set of narrows going into Tuck Inlet.
There's also a set of narrows.
Yeah.
Well, this is right past the city of Trim, and the proposal is to put this is a 5-train LNG plant on land there. And there were a couple of designs proposed, but basically, and given how it's rather large, I forget exactly, but if it's 20 megatons, divide by 60,000, and you come up with 3 or 4 of these, well, 2 or 3 of these tankers a day, and they have to come in and go out. Typically takes about 24 hours to fill them, and then they have to go out. So 6 to 8 transits a day past the city of Prince Rupert, and across, well, there are all sorts of traffic in here. I wouldn't fancy it. But, we don't have any such rules. In the US, that 500 meter, 1600 meter, 3500 meter either side of a transit of a tanker is enshrined in their environmental assessment certificate, and in the part of it called a waterway suitability analysis that says do not put LNG plants where these hazard zones would stretch on to human populated areas. Now, when the Turnpal study was done for the proposed Northern Gateway pipeline, and they had condensate tankers coming in and bitumen tankers going out, they imagined the worst possible case was, oh well, one of them whacks another one. But for most of the transit down Douglas Channel, well, really the only human population is Hartley Bay, and they kind of discounted them and said, oh well, they're great for rescuing people from sinking boats, but other than that. And it was very dismissive and insulting, to be honest with you. So this is the ferry route. The shipping route goes right past Prince Rupert and down through some narrows here, and I think these look fairly narrow. And certainly, if you plot, as somebody sent me tonight, and see if this works. Does it? Yep. It crosses some ferry lanes. Somebody hand drew those 500 meter, the middle one, the solid one, 1600 meter, and then the 3500 meter. Prince Rupert residents can look forward to some deep sunburns.
We have a home right on the outside dotted line.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, you might want to check your insurance policy next time you see it. So. And of course, well, I'll get to the environmental things, but this is of course the now famous Lower Bank, which is yet another subject. I'll come back to that in a minute. I've been chatting to Mr. McLaren, who's done some studies for you. Ooh, these are good. I've not seen this before, but so there's tankers are a problem, but also plants occasionally go boom. This one in Skikda, Algeria in 2004, 27 dead, $1 billion property damage. They just reopened it actually 11 years later. It's out in the middle of a desert, so well, it's close to the ocean, but in desert area. They were fortunate there's no town nearby, but it still destroyed the entire plant and everybody in it, crisped. So plants do blow up. This tankers do come to grips. This is one is actually owned by TK Tankers, who live in Vancouver. Originally owned by a very interesting Dane called Torben Johnstroy, whom I have met several times. It ran the ground off Nigeria and had a very tricky operation to get it to lighten it up. They had to bring another LNG tanker and do a tanker-to-tanker transfer, which they just hoped and prayed nothing went wrong with, and they were lucky and they lightened it enough to float off. But there was a pilot aboard at the time. LNG tankers, for full disclosure, in 40 years of shipping, an LNG tanker has never suffered a serious containment, loss of containment, never. But they are run by large firms. You know, you have the Chevrons and Exxons and Shells of the world who run these and maintain some reasonable control over it, knowing that they're all self-insured. They have little insurance clubs. They're private, and the amount of liability they have is also our secret, and we won't tell you. So if you go ask them, supposing you had a tanker accident off Prince Rupert, how much liability are you carrying? They'll say, none of your business. We have an insurance group that is self-insured, and the amount of liability coverage we don't like to publish because people would, their lawyers might then know how to sue us, how much we're good for it. So they don't tell you. and that's a failing of our EA process, that at least they should be able to post a bond that says this much in case the nastiest happens. Anyhow, this one, there was an LNG tanker last week or the week before, somewhere around there, off Belgium, coming out of Zeebrugge, and a freighter, Belgian freighter. They were looking at each other for 15 miles. Each had a pilot aboard. And this is a fairly highly controlled area at the entrance to the English Channel. They whacked each other, and the LNG tanker was lucky. It suffered no loss of containment, but it sank the freighter, which was half its size. These things do have accidents. Very fortunate so far. Another one off last December off Singapore, where a container ship twanged an LNG tanker, and the lucky thing was that they were both going in the same direction. Otherwise there would have been, because they were going full speed. Again, you can draw these circles. This is Tilbury. This is at the mouth of the Fraser. The Mayor of Richmond is not wildly pleased with that, and neither are his residents. Dispersion models vary. Fracking fluid has its own disasters. This was April this year. Lightning struck a tank in holding fracking fluid, which is what they dilute with water in order to pressurize the fracking hole. And this was rather good, what happened to the tank. So if a tanker, LNG tanker, fires up in this fashion, you're going to see a pockmark on the moon. Other hassles with this, with shipping, you're going to have to refuel these things because they're not coastal traffic. This is going 7,000 kilometers to Beijing or Guangzhou or one of those places. They need fuel. And the VC government says, oh, but they all fueled by their own LNG. And in truth, in part, that's true. About 2/3 of the fleet are steam boiler ships. And in the steam boiler, you can put probably about anything in there that'll burn and you'll get propulsion. They're very notoriously inefficient. But typically, an LNG tanker loses 6% of its cargo on the way on a 14-day journey to Asia. It boils off. These little bulbs are not perfect insulators. So their alternative is to vent them, which is rather dangerous, given how flammable it is, or to use it, to put it into the steam boiler, mix it with some diesel and or bunker fuel. Is it IP380 or 180? I forget which one is the real bunker C. And then they power the ship with that. So they don't vent it, they burn it in their steam boilers. But they do need bunker fuel. All of them do. And where are they going to get it? So you're going to have, these are a lot of ships, and they're going a long way. You're going to need several thousand tons of bunker fuel in each one of these ships. And remember, there's 2 to 4 of them a day. Where are you going to get the bunker fuel? Because bunker fuel, if you ship it by truck, comes in 20-ton loads. 3,000 tons divided by 20, you got 150 trucks coming up the highway. If they're going to do that, they won't. They'll bring in a barge. Now you have barge traffic added to the whole mix. Not nice. But ask the question in the EA, where are these ships going to refuel? They can't exactly pull into your corner gas store and say, fill her up. So, as you know, we had a bunker spill of small proportions in Vancouver, which caused huge furore, and the spill response in Vancouver, which was located not a nautical mile away from that Maratasa, took 16 hours to respond. It had 3 changes of tide. It was all over the beaches of West Vancouver, and it actually was reported by 2 sailors out for a gin and tonic in an afternoon, so not by the Coast Guard. The other little fact is, of course, that the Spill Response Organization, the Western Canadian Spill Response Corporation, is 51% owned by Kinder Morgan. This is the stuff that wound up on the beach and caused so much furor. Which Kinder Morgan, I don't know whether they were big for verse, but they said, they quoted it as a benefit, one of the benefits of employment benefits of their pipeline to Vancouver. They said, but think of the employment it'll generate. Clean it up. I said in a spill you get this low fog cloud of very cold LNG evaporating and sucking up all the water vapor. This is a tanker, an LNG tanker truck in China, doing just that.
A video has emerged of the terrifying moment a gas tanker exploded on a highway in China, killing 5 people and sending visible shockwaves across the road. People were filmed desperately trying to escape as smoke billowed from a tanker that had overturned on the major motorway in central China's Hunan province on Saturday. After the road is engulfed in thick smoke, a massive blast rocks the highway and surrounding valley. 5 people, including 3 firefighters, were killed in the explosion. 2 fire trucks and 5 other vehicles were destroyed. The tanker was carrying liquefied natural gas and had leaked around 20 tons before the blast. The tanker was still burning on Sunday afternoon. 7 vehicles, including 2 fire trucks, were destroyed in the blast. The cause of the accident is still under investigation.
The difference between that is, and 20 tons and 60,000 is, do the math, 300 of those. Emissions, this is some numbers for wood fiber. It's going to be electrically powered. Not all together, because they have some what I call amine baths to sweep the mercaptans, the smelly stuff that they put in the gas to make sure that you know it's leaking. In there they have to sweep that out, and that's going to be a gas-fired oil bath to take the mercaptans and some other stuff out of their hydrogen sulfides. But it's going to kick out about 142,000 tons of CO2. This is an electrically powered one. All of them up here will, if they go ahead, be gas-powered. So a little math. Typically, to generate the enormous amounts of electricity you need to liquefy, to run that refrigerator, you use 9 to 12%, let's say 10% of the gas supply. So if you got a 20 megaton plant, you're using 2 million tons of it a year to run the generator, to generate the electricity to run the refrigerator. 2 million tons burned of methane will generate 5 to 6 million tons of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases. That is about 1/10 of BC's entire GHG footprint. This in a province that has promised to reduce our footprint by 33% by 2020, barely 5 years from now, and by 80% by 2050. That's only one plant. If you do 5 of them, we're talking a huge increase, not decrease, in our greenhouse gas commitment reduction, which, as I reminded the Premier, is legislated. It's a law passed by the Campbell government, which it would appear the current government is intent on ignoring.
Question.
Yeah.
So in Kitimat, if you have a decent-sized LNG plant, what would we be breathing here in Terrace for air?
It depends on the wind, clearly.
Yeah, suppose it was going this way.
Carbon dioxide has the nasty effect of ocean acidification. The rain will drop it down. It will acidify all of your water supply because it's a weak carbon dioxide plus water gives you carbonic acid. It's a weak acid, but it basically will taint your water quite significantly. It has to go somewhere. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air, so it'll stick down where the rain gets it and drops it into your water. So you'll start to see your aluminum pipes corrode. You'll see your lakes, like the one out between here. Your lakes acidify, and that will be not just the carbon dioxide, but the sulfur dioxide that will go with it will be significant. You're going to wind up with looking a bit like Sudbury because the plants will die.
So how about breathing? What's the...
Asthmatics will find it very hard on them because there will be particulate matter and nitrous oxides, which is particularly nasty which is the yellow smoggy thing that Los Angeles is famous for. There'll be some of that because of incomplete combustion. You will find your air quality significantly reduced. The adiabatic winds blow the winds inwards in some parts of the year, and the outflow winds. And typically one is if they're like how sound will be one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So it will blow it back and forth, so you'll get it several times a day. Not good. Not at all the pristine environment that costs you to live here in the first place. So, they're basically using your air and water as a toilet. End of story. For free. Because I read tonight the environmental assessment approval, and it said, we know that we're exceeding the allowable sulfur, the allowable carbon dioxide, the allowable nitrous oxide emissions, but that's as good as we can get next. Signed, Rich Coleman, Mary Pollack. It's quite stunning that they can ignore a law and say, oh, well, we've done our bit. Rather than go back to the proponent and go, if you want to do business here, you first of all do not pollute our water, you do not mistreat our workers, and you pay your fair share of taxes. And those are kind of 3 cardinal rules, and they're breaking all of them. And other than that, I have no strong opinions on the subject. Plant emissions are anyway a small part of the total life cycle emissions. CCS is carbon capture and storage, which until recently has been a figment of people's imagination. Nobody has invented a technology that works. There's a couple of minor exceptions to that. They're coming along fairly well, but they're all experimental. There's nobody who's doing it. LNG plants worldwide use gas to power their generators, and they spew it out of the carbon dioxides of the world. Every 100 tons of LNG produced will ultimately, in an reverse life cycle, run 330 tons of GHG emissions. Almost, depending on the amount that comes out of the wellhead, the leakages in the wellhead casings. Marginally, at best case, better than coal. Worst case, significantly worse than coal. So you're not gaining anything climatically. Treating it as a transition fluid, it's fuel. It's cleaner than coal. Therefore, we should ship it to China. They can clean up their air. We have 11 coal-burning plants in Alberta and Saskatchewan alone. If you buy the theory that it's cleaner than coal, or it can be made cleaner than coal, why aren't we cleaning that air? And yeah, this is what I've talked about, no, it's not just BC is missing its greenhouse target. This is our next door neighbour. Canada has a sad emissions record. We are very hopeful that as of Monday night we might do something about that. And then there's this dude in Rome that says it's a moral imperative. And ultimately the scientific argument has failed. The political argument has failed, so we have to put our hope in that the moral argument might work. You have the Flora Bank here, which well, not here, but Rupert. It's a very unique environment, and I've been speaking with Patrick McLaren, who's been looking at the sedimentary layers. It's a very unique environment, and particularly because it's the place where the salmon hatchlings and steelhead and several others adjust to the marine environment when they come out of the Stikine, or the Skeena River. Stikine in my mind because my son just commuted. The Petronas putting a trestle bridge over the Flora is just, why would you put an economy, salmon economy that First Nations have relied on for 10,000 years at risk for an LNG plant that gives you nothing? Our government seems to think it's a good idea. I don't. I spoke of ocean acidification, sedimentation changes, the economic loss of fishing and outfitting, the noise. Herring are particularly sensitive to noise because they vocalize. and they use it to stay away from predators, orcas and things. So if you introduce a noise source like a thumping LNG plant into the water and thumping tankers, you're basically blinding them or making so much noise you can't hear each other. It's like being in a disco when you're trying to have a conversation. So if the herring go, the salmon go. If the salmon go, the orcas go. If the orcas go, the food chain's go. Not good. This one is I haven't looked at all the proposals for up here, but the wood fiber one proposes to cool it by seawater. It's called once through seawater cooling. And it's banned, California, New York, most of Europe bans this. Because what it does is suck in a huge amount of water through all those pipes, gets it really hot, makes the biggest buoy base in the world, and blows it out, chlorinated and hot, back into, in this case, house sound. Deadly. Chlorine is deadly to aquatic species, particularly the smaller stuff, the phytoplankton and all of the brown algae in which herring lay their eggs. So if you denude the entire place of that, then the herring have nowhere to lay their eggs, and you wind up with the whole food chain collapsing. This small plant, 2 million tons, in house sound, is proposing to dump 17,000 tons, that's 7 swimming pools, Olympic size, an hour into house sound for the next 25 years. And even the First Nations said, not up in your Barney you'll be allowed to do that. But the government is seriously thinking of allowing them to do it. So. Economics. Okay, supply and demand is what economics is mostly about. I said there was about 240 million tons a year, most of it to Asia, is the world's supply of LNG. Qatar, long LNG thing, Iran before it got shut out and is now back on the market, but I haven't included any of them here. These are plants, all of them, that are existing, committed, final investment decision made, stuff starting to build. Russia, Australia, Indonesia, some Malaysian, Nigeria, Iran, and currently sanctioned but about to be unsanctioned, Papua New Guinea, Mozambique, and then a big pile of LNG facilities in the US that have all been built as import plants when they needed to import it until they discovered fracking and directional drilling. Suddenly are in the business of exporting it from their huge shale formations down there. And lo and behold, the total that is already committed by 2021, next 5 years, is magically the entire world's current demand, which, when they started this, looked like it was going to go through the roof, but lately, in the last 3 years, has not only flattened out, flatlined, has actually gone down for a whole bunch of reasons. Japan is wanting to turn its nuclear reactors back on because 53 of them were sidelined after Fukushima. China did 2 big pipeline deals, not LNG, just straight through pipe with Russia for $10 a million BTUs and about $8 a million BTUs, cheaper than any plant here can deliver. Korea decided, nuclear and coal, we're good. And then other countries have said, too expensive for us. We'll either do renewables, like China is investing more in renewables than we are. The chances that the world's going to be able to soak up in 5 years double its existing demand is close to zero. And when demand isn't up to snuff and you've got money in the ground spent, the only thing that can happen to price is a southerly drift. My own pharma company, KPMG, said there was a brief window in time when, about last year, when demand exceeded short-term supply, but for the rest of the foreseeable future, so at least 2030, we're going to be in an oversupply situation. There's too much LNG chasing too little demand. Fukushima, the price went up from roughly $10 per million BTUs, and this Fukushima point in 2011, you remember that? It went up and it hit almost $20 at one stage, and that was when Premier Clark said it might be a good idea to get in this business. But the problem is, The break-even price is about just a little, about $12, which in other words, if you're going to make money in this business, you have to be getting $12. Current price, $7. Rough rule of thumb, when you see on the evening CBC News, you see what the oil price is, take that price divided by 7, and that's the LNG price today. Currently it's about $45. Anybody watch? When Peter Mangrood's finished tonight, you can go look at him, and he always quotes the world oil price, and divide by 7, that's the LNG price. And if it's lower than $12, why would a businessman want to sell something for $7 that it costs 12 to make?
What happens if the price falls up to 75, say 2 years from now?
Then you have to wonder, why will the world be able to absorb? You saw the list of plants that are going to double the supply. And when you don't double the demand, remember the demand is flat or declining. When you don't, the world of economics works on the price, the supply-demand equation, and the price is settled on the balance between those two. If you have an overabundance of supply and an underabundance of demand, there's nothing for the price to do but drop. The chances that the world oil price will go to $85, which is kind of multiply 12 by 7, you get close to $85 and a barrel, is close to zero, because the Saudis have determined that the quicker we sell all our oil, the better, because this carbon thing is getting to be serious. And we're going to knock off the oil sands and all of those other dudes who are interfering with our being the chief dudes in the world who sell oil. What happens is these plants would come back online if that did happen. Chances of it happening are, by the inexorable logic of supply-demand, pretty small. And if they make a final investment decision, then they clearly are working off numbers I have never heard about and I don't understand. And Reuters, Bloomberg, pretty well every economic analyst who deals in the oil and gas sector says, get ready for oil between 40 and $50 for the foreseeable future. And even if oil goes up, LNG won't. It has previously been indexed to oil, but the de-indexation will continue until, because whereas oil may be in demand and limited things, we've got this overabundance of LNG coming, so the chances that it's going to be profitable is close to zero. And last up, businessmen make decisions in the boardroom about, will this be a profitable venture? And when you go to a bank and say, well, I don't know whether I can make a profit in this thing in the next 15 years or not, they just chuckle as they throw you out.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I just wondered how long that kind of analysis has been understood in terms of the price of LNG. Just because I know that you're saying a businessman would make that decision, but like when do you know, or when do you have understood those market ideas?
About the last 2 years since I started looking at it, is that it's been clear to more and more people, particularly all the oil analysts and gas analysts in the world have published it. As I said, if you go look at Google Asian LNG price, and you'll run across a plethora of articles from the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Bloomberg, all the big analysts of the world. Platts is the probably recognized source for gas prices in the world and gas futures. And they all say much the same thing, which is we're in for low-cost LNG for the foreseeable future, at least till 2025, 2030. So anybody making a bet by building an LNG plant right now better be prepared for 10 to 15 years of losses before you can make any money. Most businessmen I know goes, well, I'll wait 10 or 15 years before I make that investment. And that's precisely what's happening. In the 3 years since, almost 4 years since Christy Clark said we're going to have an industry and 100,000 jobs, there's not been a single inch of pipeline built, nor has there been a single FID. Not one, nor is there likely to be. This is the price breakdown. The gas itself costs about $3. Then you add liquefaction and storage, about another $3.50 according to world standards. It just costs that much. You add the shipping in on top because these are sold ex FOB destination, and you add the very hefty interest costs if you have to borrow this money, and then you add the capital recovery, because you got a recovery in principal as well. It's a bit like a mortgage, you pay both the interest and the principal, and you're up to $12. The unfortunate bit is that at current prices, there's a small capital loss. Well, in fact, a pretty hefty one. So that doesn't make for any good investments. Pembina Institute looked at this and said, at a price of $12 before, given the deal that's been done with Petronas and the low 3.5% tax rate that will be applied to LNG, it'll be at least 14 years before there's a single penny contributed to the revenue of BC. And that's Pembina. And that was at $12. Current price? $7.
So what do you know about the contract that Petronas is supposed to have signed with BC government?
Quite a bit. It says, would you like 3.5% LNG tax guaranteed for 25 years? We will not increase the carbon tax, which you'll be paying, which is $30 a ton. We will not increase that for 25 years. We will, there's a whole bunch of other things that they promised, that we won't increase your PST, GST.
There's also a Me Too, isn't there?
And there's a Me Too, yeah. There's, if another LNG company gets a better deal, you'll be entitled to it.
How about the royalties? Oh, you got a chart there, okay.
There is no LNG export business at the moment, but there is an there's a gas royalty charged at the wellhead. But that is again charged on net profit,
Yes.
not on like Norway and other folks who are smarter than we are. Not charged on, you take a gallon of it out of the soil and you pay a gallon. This allows accounting tricks to net out. 2014, total royalties to the BC government, $169 million. Now, given how we have a $69 billion debt, the 408 years to pay off the debt, so you better be into Methuselah or something like that if you want to see debt-free BC. The other little trick here, this is an example from wood fibre. If you've heard about transfer pricing, all of the international companies are into it. It is the single biggest leak in our taxation system. And here's how it operates. I'll try and explain this as simple as I can. The corporate ownership of this wood fibre, and this is an example, they all do this, is owned by a Singapore company called Pacific Oil and Gas. This is this Tenoda dude. The ownership of the gas is this Pacific Energy Corp that buys it in Calgary, doesn't pay PST on it, and then passes it ownership over to a Singapore company called Wood Fibre Export Pte Limited, who are the dudes who got the export permit from National Energy Board. So the plant itself is called Wood Fibre LNG Limited, which will be paid on a tolling agreement. That's a contract between the Singapore company and the Canadian company to liquefy and store the gas. They'll never own it. They'll just be paid on a contract, liquefy and store it. Now, you can easily see that if this company pays that company just the amount of costs that it incurs in liquefying and storing it, then their net profit is a big fat zero. And when this sells it to whatever other company in the world they sell it, China, and this is based in Singapore, which doesn't have any income tax on LNG producers because they want to be the hub for LNG in the world. You suddenly got all the dollars disappearing to a tax haven. And I guess the way our tax laws are written, our tax treaty between here and Singapore is written that if the entity is taxed and resident in Singapore, Singapore taxes apply, Canada does not apply tax, because we want to avoid double taxation. In this case, they're trying to avoid taxation entirely. And that's the deal. So the chances that your healthcare costs and your hospitals and social services will be paid by this outfit is close to zero. And this man just got fined $250 million for tax evasion in the British Virgin Islands. They all do this. I think I'm going to stop there because it's pretty obvious to me that in summary, fossil fuels is an era gone by. There are very few jobs in this whole industry. There's 330 in the whole Northwest LNG. The only other jobs, the major supply of other jobs, take out the whole one-time deal, right? That's short-term thinking, and we shouldn't be into that, not if we value our children and grandchildren. The other jobs are on drilling rigs, fracking rigs, driving trucks with water back and forth to drilling out to drill holes. And there are an unknown number of those, but there are thousands of them. I have 3 children, and my idea of their future is not living in a work camp and being a drilling rig operator. Sorry, but they don't want that, and I really don't want it for them either. And that is a future that they don't look forward to, and I don't think they should be doing. And this industry, if that's the picture where the plant will be occupied by temporary foreign workers and all our kids will be out in work camps with drilling rigs, sorry, but that's not a picture that I think a first world country should be looking to, especially one with the kind of education system and brains that we do, and that there has to be a better way. And I think the alternate better way is everybody's talked about renewables and investments of that and what we've got. I think that's a much better, brighter future that we really do have to. Oh, did I tell you that Chevron is also being sued? And the amount of potential lost revenue from Chevron's tax avoidance scheme is more than Australia's annual budget for education and more than half the annual budget for health. These are not nice people. Like I said. And their gas prices went up. Maybe I'll stop there. Take questions.